Story 1. Patrick's Unsettling Presence. This is going to sound weird, but bear with me. When I was in high school, there was this kid. I don't even feel comfortable writing his name, for reasons you'll understand soon. I'll just call him Patrick, even though his real name sounded like something out of a Shakespeare play. He was different, extremely socially awkward. He drifted through the hallways with this vacant stare that made even the teachers uneasy. He wore the same blank grey hoodie every single day. I'm not exaggerating. And he always had this smell, like something decaying. He was short, pretty average looking, although you wouldn't know it because he never took his hood or sunglasses off, even inside. Teachers eventually gave up asking. Now, here's where it gets strange. Patrick didn't have friends, not in the traditional sense. He adopted people. If he decided he liked you completely at random, he'd walk up and declare, "You're adopted." It was his way of saying you were part of his circle. Apparently, this made you safe from him or something. That's what he'd say, anyway. He didn't adopt many people, though I was one of the unfortunate few. Looking back, I think it's because he had a creepy crush on me. None of us took his demon talk seriously. We just figured he was troubled, which he obviously was. This all took place in Wayne, Pennsylvania, a seemingly normal suburban town, but beneath the surface, things were brewing. Another girl I was friends with, Gabby, had also been adopted. Patrick's crush on her was far more obvious. All our friends knew. One day, we were hanging out behind the school, Gabby, Laura, Luke, and me, just killing time. Somehow, the conversation drifted to Patrick's crush on Gabby. We were all laughing. Gabby was mortified. And then, Laura said his real name. Not the nickname we usually used, but his actual name. 3 times. And I swear, on my life, Patrick materialized out of thin air, standing on top of the dugout with a baseball bat. It wasn't conventionally scary, but utterly unsettling. We froze, thinking he'd overheard us. He didn't say a word, just stared. I gave a nervous wave. He nodded back, then jumped down and walked away. As soon as he was gone, we burst out laughing, the tension breaking. But inside, I felt a chill. The next incident was far more disturbing. I was at Laura's house. Her parents were home, and again, Patrick's name came up 3 times. Not 10 minutes later, we heard the front door slam. Confused, we ran downstairs, thinking one of our other friends had arrived. Laura's parents were super chill, so people came and went all the time. Laura's mum beat us to the door. We rounded the corner into the living room, and there he was, Patrick, talking to Laura's mum. She asked what he was doing there. His reply, "I was summoned." Laura's mum made small talk, then politely asked him to leave, which he silently did. She knew Patrick, pitied him, so no alarm bells went off for her. But Laura and I were freaked out. Walking back upstairs, we whispered about how creepy it was, and then it hit us. He appeared after his name was said 3 times, both times. It sounded ridiculous, but we'd witnessed 2 unexplainable events, coupled with his demon claims. What other explanation was there? We told our friends, and we all vowed never to say his name 3 times again. Things were quiet for a few months. I started to think I'd overreacted, until one day, at my friend Johnny's house, we were on his back deck, and the topic, inevitably, turned to Patrick. Johnny, despite our best efforts, refused to believe our stories. To prove his point, he mockingly said Patrick's real name 3 times in one sentence. When nothing happened, he smirked and called us gullible. Part of me was relieved. I spoke too soon. Minutes later, Patrick vaulted over Johnny's backyard fence. Johnny went silent, pointing. The rest of us followed his gaze. Patrick just stood there, staring. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he jumped back over the fence and vanished. Johnny freaked, accusing us of conspiring with Patrick. We'd practically begged him not to say anything. Johnny, shaken, told us all to go home. The last incident was the scariest. A few months later, I was home alone, a rare occurrence. I invited a guy over, kind of a tool, but so were most guys I talked to back then. We were in my room, a light rain falling outside. He mentioned Patrick, making me cringe. I explained the whole story. He laughed, saying he'd say Patrick's name to scare me. I begged him not to, but he did, screaming the name 3 times at the top of his lungs. There was no delay this time. The instant he finished, the rain intensified. Seconds later, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the sky. I freaked. He tried to reassure me, calling it a coincidence. I cursed him out and ran to the window to watch the storm. Glancing down at my driveway, I screamed. A figure stood there, looking up at my window. Too dark to be sure, but I was 99% certain it was Patrick. I slammed the blinds, raced downstairs, locked all the doors. Checking the back door, I saw him again, motionless in my front yard. Panic seized me. I knew he was going to get inside. I started screaming, but I'm adopted. Over and over, a desperate, irrational plea. The guy I was with found me on the kitchen floor, trying to comfort me. When I looked out again, Patrick was gone. The storm raged, but there was no way I was going outside. The next morning, after the guy left, I inspected my yard. In the far corner, I found Patrick's hoodie. Wrapped inside were a few random belongings of mine I thought I'd lost. My parents were gone again. I was too scared to call the police, planning to show my parents after school. I never had to. Patrick didn't show up to school that day, or ever again. No one knew what happened to him. My parents still live in that house. I think about it a lot. I know this isn't your typical scary story, but I had to tell someone. Some people from school said they'd seen Patrick hiding, eavesdropping, which might explain how he appeared so quickly. As I've gotten older, the most likely explanation is he was a mentally ill stalker, following me, maybe other girls too. The thought of him lurking, listening. I don't even want to think about where he is now. Story 2. Snowstorm, detour, and a strange sight. I'm from Denver. This happened a few years ago. My friend, Mike, and I were heading to a dinner party one snowy Saturday evening. We were pretty excited about it, as it was a chance to catch up with old friends we hadn't seen in a while. The party was being hosted by our mutual friend, Sarah, who was known for her amazing cooking and even better company. We decided to stop at a liquor store before heading to the party. It was a bit out of the way, honestly, a pretty annoying detour with the snow coming down hard, making the roads slick and treacherous. But we didn't want to show up empty-handed. After browsing the aisles, we picked out some local craft beers, a hoppy IPA for me, a stout for Mike, and a bottle of whiskey for Sarah. We paid and made our way back to my beat-up old sedan. I scraped the ice started to pick up while Mike fumbled with his keys. Just as we were about to pull out, he realized he'd forgotten his SIN. He ran back into the store, while I muttered under my breath about how impatient I was getting. I was driving a clunky old car with questionable tires, not exactly ideal for navigating snowy Denver streets. A few minutes later, he hopped back in, ZIN in hand, oblivious to my mounting anxiety. I carefully pulled out of the parking lot, and we were back on our way. The snow was now falling, even heavier, the roads becoming increasingly hazardous. The drive was supposed to be straightforward, about 20 to 30 minutes through familiar suburban neighborhoods. Usually, it was a quick trip, but tonight, with the blizzard-like conditions, I felt a knot of unease in my stomach. I'm not a confident driver in the best of conditions, and the way the car was slipping every few seconds definitely wasn't helping matters. As we navigated the winding roads, visibility decreased drastically. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to maintain control as the car fishtailed slightly. After a tense few minutes driving uphill, I rounded a bend and saw something that immediately sent a chill down my spine. In the middle of the street, a stopped car with its hazards flashing ominously. It looked abandoned, the driver and passenger side doors both wide open. It was a surreal sight against the backdrop of the falling snow. I considered driving around it. Part of me, the selfish, pragmatic part, just wanted to get to Sarah's and enjoy the evening. But Mike insisted we stop. He had a point. Someone could be in trouble, hurt, or worse. And while I'm not typically a good Samaritan, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Judge me if you want, but I'm not your typical helpful stranger, mostly because I'd been in too many dicey situations to trust strangers easily. Plus, I didn't want to get out of the car. The cold was biting, and the thought of trudging through the snow filled me with dread. But Mike's concerned look convinced me. We pulled up behind the stranded car, and an eerie silence settled over us, broken only by the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. Mike suggested we check it out, stating the obvious. I rolled my eyes. He was right, of course. Watching from the car wouldn't help anyone, but I was still hesitant. I asked him to wait a few minutes, just to see if anyone emerged from the surrounding houses. He reluctantly agreed, and we sat there, the blinking hazards of the abandoned car casting an unsettling glow. Nothing happened, which, frankly, surprised me. Eventually, Mike decided he'd had enough and opened the door. Before I could stop him, he was out in the snow, cautiously approaching the vehicle. A rising sense of dread washed over me. I watched him through the swirling snow, a strange premonition creeping into my mind. As he peered into the car, I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, something dark and shadowy against the snowbank. My heart pounded in my chest. Maybe it was just my imagination, the stress getting to me. But then, not 10 seconds later, the car jolted, ever so slightly, as if something had shifted in the trunk or back seat. That was it. I slammed my hand on the horn, a long, insistent blast. Mike, startled, spun around and sprinted back to the car. I floored it, tires spinning in the snow, and we sped away from the scene. I told Mike I thought it was a trap, that the whole thing felt staged. He was annoyed that I had no proof, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to risk our lives based on a misplaced sense of civic duty. The rest of the drive was tense. Mike was sulking, probably thinking I'd overreacted. But I couldn't shake the image of that jolting car and the shadowy figure I'd seen. When we finally arrived at Sarah's, it felt like stepping into a different world. Warmth, laughter, the smell of delicious food. It was a welcome escape from the icy tension of the drive. We pushed the incident to the back of our minds, enjoying the party and catching up with friends. A few hours later, as some guests were leaving, Sarah turned on the local news to check on the snowstorm. And there it was, flashing on the screen. A report of a carjacking, not 2 hours earlier, involving a staged breakdown. A stranded car with open doors, and multiple perpetrators hiding in the snow and the trunk. The victims, a woman and her teenage son, had stopped to help, only to be ambushed at gunpoint. I stared at Mike, a chilling realization sinking in. That could have been us. We shared our near miss with the other guests, and the story quickly spread, casting a sobering pall over the remaining festivities. Everyone was shocked, grateful we'd escaped unharmed. The experience left me even more distrustful of strangers than I already was. I often wonder how many people I might have helped in a genuine time of need if I hadn't stumbled into that meticulously planned trap. And though I'm glad we were spared, a part of me still feels a pang of guilt, a sense of unease about the world and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of a snowy night.